Um, and then another classic example in Surah Al-Baqarah also, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الصفا والمروة من شعائر الله فمن حج البيت أو اعتمر فلا جناح عليه أن يطوف بهما ومن تطوع خيرا فإن الله شاكر عليم. Indeed, the mountains of Safa, or the hills of Safa and Marwa, are among the indications of Allah, or the outer signs, the symbols of Allah's religion. It is therefore no sin for whoever is on pilgrimage to the house of Allah or visits it to go around them, to make the sa'i between the Safa and Marwa. And whoever does good of his own accord, indeed Allah is responsive, aware. It's verse 158. Now, Urwa ibn Zubayr, who was the nephew rather of Aisha, his mother was Asma, Aisha's sister. So Urwa was one of the younger tabi'in, and he became one of the seven fuqaha of Medina. He was one of the most prominent scholars of his generation, and probably the single most important teacher he had was Aisha. So he was once sitting with her, and he started talking about this verse. And because the verse says, فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يَطَّوَّفَ بِهِمَا. The term la junah means there's no blame, there's no sin for making sa'i. So it doesn't give the sense of obligation. And so he said, what I understand from this verse is that this is an optional act. Making sa'i is not obligatory in the Hajj or the Umrah. And Aisha said, no, you've completely misunderstood, because this verse was revealed to respond to misgivings on the part of the Ansar. The Ansar in particular had particular devotion to two idols that were placed on top of Safa, one on top of Safa and the other on top of Marwa. And so it was very much a part of their religious rituals in the pre-Islamic era that they would pay a lot of attention to Safa and Marwa. They would go back and forth between them to offer homage to these deities. And so when Islam came, these two hills were so associated with shirk in their minds that they were reluctant to go between them because of the association in their minds. And then so the verse was revealed indicating that no, this is not correct understanding, because these hills, their significance predates any of those idols. That was a later accretion, and then the original importance of the two was because of hajjahs running between them. And so when you understand that, then the verse doesn't declare one way or another about Safa and Marwa being obligatory or not obligatory. That comes in the Sunnah. That's what Aisha mentioned. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "O people, Allah has prescribed sa'i for you, so fas'au, so make sa'i." So the verse doesn't negate obligation, and that's what Urwa had mistakenly understood from it. The verse is silent on the issue of obligation, and it's clearing up the misconception of the Ansar. And then finally, an example that's frequently quoted. This hadith is in It's definitely Muslim. I believe it's also in Bukhari. The verse in Surah Al-Imran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لا تحسبن الذين يفرحون بما أتوا ويحبون أن يحمدوا بما لم يفعلوا فلا تحسبنهم بمفازة من العذاب ولهم عذاب أليم. Think not that those who exult in what they have given and love to be praised for what they have not done, do not think that they are in safety from the doom. A painful punishment is theirs. Verse 188. And Marwan ibn al-Hakam, he was the governor of Medina, a relative of Uthman, and but he was governor for Muawiyah also. So he asked Ibn Abbas about this verse, and he said, who among us does not like to be praised for what they've done? For any reason. And so Ibn Abbas, he said, no, said the verse was revealed about a group of prominent Jews. The Prophet ﷺ, he called them for something and he asked them a question. And they gave him spurious information. They told him something that wasn't right. And then they left thinking that they put one over on him. And so then that verse was revealed. And so the verse had a specific sabab, and there is a general wording. We're going to get to that issue now, not right now, but later, about, do you understand verses according to their general wording or according to their specific cause? There's a middle point in understanding this particular relationship in this particular incident, which is that Marwan had understood it too generally. Now the cause of the revelation of the verse was specifically about the Jews. That doesn't mean that the verse is limited to that particular group of Jews, that it's only talking about them. But people who act in a similar way to that group of Jews, the verse would apply to them. Now, sometimes you have general statements. This is actually very common. General statements or rules in the Quran or the Sunnah that have been limited, that some of the members of the set that are covered linguistically by the wording have been excluded due to some other evidence. So when it comes to the sabab al-nuzool for a particular verse, then all scholars agree that the sabab al-nuzool for sure falls within the wording of the text, and there's no way that it can be excluded. Now, an example that Zarqani gave for a misunderstanding of something, in this case it was from the Sunnah, misunderstanding of a text because the full circumstances surrounding a statement of the Prophet ﷺ didn't reach the scholar. And this is with regard to the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, al-waladu lil-farash wa lil-ahir al-hajar. So, al-waladu lil-farash literally means the child is for the bedding. And what that really means is that the child is attributed to the man who has the right to intercourse with the mother. Now, in our context and in our time, the man who has a right to intercourse with a woman is her husband. In previous eras, there were such a thing as slaves, and so the permission also included a slave owned by a man, a female slave owned by a man. So in discussing that hadith, Abu Hanifa, he said, well, the hadith applies to a husband and a wife. It doesn't apply to a slave woman and her owner. Now, other narrations that didn't reach Abu Hanifa, apparently, they told the whole story, that this statement was made by the Prophet ﷺ in the context of a dispute. Upon the conquest of Mecca, Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, he came with a boy who was the son of a slave woman belonging to this man named Zam'a, who was the father of Sauda, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. And Sa'd's brother, who had been a mushrik and who died as a mushrik, at some point he had confided in Sa'd that he used to have intercourse with this slave woman, and that child that she had given birth to was actually his child. And so when Sa'd made that announcement, the son of Zam'a had died by then, Sauda's brother, he said, wait a minute, no. His name was Abd. He said, this is my father's slave girl, and he used to have relations with her. This is my brother. And so they disputed about it, and the Prophet ﷺ, he made that statement. In other words, he was attributing the child to the woman's owner. And so for Abu Hanifa to exclude that case of slave woman and her owner from the statement, there's no way that can be accepted, because the statement was made in that context about that particular situation. So that's an example of, and they don't call it Asbaab al-nuzool, but they call it Sabab Wurud al-Hadith when it comes to the Sunnah. And another example of something that may be a benefit of Sabab al-Nuzul is that if you know exactly who the verse was revealed about, then you won't confusingly or confusedly accuse someone who's innocent of something that they're innocent of. And the example is given with relation to this is the story of Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr. In Mecca, when the Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca, he did not accept Islam. And in fact, he fought at the Battle of Badr on the side of the mushriks. He came from Mecca to fight against the Muslims. And there are some narrations that mention he said to his father later, he accepted Islam later, and he told his father, Abu Bakr, he said, there were a number of times when you came within reach of my sword. I could have killed you at the Battle of Badr, but I held off because you're my father. And Abu Bakr said, well, if it had been the other way around, I would have killed you. Anyway, that's an aside. The point is that Abdurrahman did not accept Islam until pretty late in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, when Muawiyah was the Khalifa, and he asked people to take bay'ah, to give a pledge of allegiance to his son, Yazid, during Muawiyah's lifetime. And so that order went out to the various governors, and Marwan, who was his governor over Medina, he stood up on the minbar and he said everybody should give bay'ah to Yazid. And Abdurrahman ibn Abu Bakr, he stood up and he said, this is not right, something to that effect. And so Marwan, of course, this somebody challenging his authority, and so he pointed at him. He said, "Get him!" And the guards, somebody's supposed to arrest him, and so he went running, and he took refuge in Aisha's house. Now, of course, Aisha was, she had a room in the masjid. I don't know at that point if she was still living, but I assume so. The room in which the Prophet ﷺ was buried. So Rahman takes refuge in her apartment, and then Marwan, he said, "This is the one that these verses were revealed about in it's in Surah number 46, verse 17. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والذي قال لوالديه أف لكما أتعدانني أن أخرج وقد خلت القرون من قبلي وهما يستغيثان الله ويلك آمن إن وعد الله حق فيقول ما هذا إلا أساطير الأولين." And the one who said to his parents, now Pickthall, he translates it in the present case because it can possibly have this sense that this is a general case. And the one who said to his parents, "Fie upon you both. Do you threaten me that I would be brought forth again when generations before me have passed away?" And they both cried to Allah for help, or cried, technically, and said, "Woe to you, believe, indeed the promise of Allah is true." But he said, "This is nothing but fables of the men of old." So, Marwan said this verse 17, was revealed about Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr. And Aisha said, "That's not true. Nothing was revealed about us," meaning the children of Abu Bakr, "except the verses that exonerated me." So, and in one narration, she mentioned, she said, "I know about who it was revealed about, and if I cared to say so, I could," but she declined to do so. And then another benefit from knowledge of Asbaab al-nuzool is that when the stories that are associated with the words and the laws, when those details are known, it sort of gives you more handles for your memory, so to speak. So it becomes easier to memorize a verse and its rules. And this is very well known that people who have these fantastic memories, they do these shows where they have an audience and they'll start asking people their names, stuff that what they do is that they file these things in certain sort of like mental drawers, and they do that by associating this person's name with such and such a thing. So this whole idea of association, firming your memory up, this is a well-known phenomenon empirically.